The Anunnaki did not emerge from nothing. Long before Anu claimed dominion over heaven, before Enlil commanded the winds of earth, before Enki shaped humanity from clay and divine blood, something else existed. The cuneiform tablets recovered from Nippur and Eridu speak of older powers, primordial forces that preceded the gods themselves. Tiamat, the salt sea dragon. Apsu, the freshwater abyss. Namu, the mother ocean whom even the great gods addressed with reverence. These were not minor spirits or forgotten demons. They were the cosmic parents, the first movers, the darkness before starlight knew its own name. Welcome, dear friend. It's good to have you here tonight. Perhaps the evening has grown quiet around you, and the weight of the day is finally beginning to ease. Maybe you're settling into that familiar spot where sleep eventually finds you, or perhaps you're still searching for the right position, the right stillness. Wherever you are, whatever hour the clock might show, you've arrived at exactly the right moment. Thank you for choosing to spend this time together, for trusting these words to carry you somewhere peaceful. I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Tonight, we're reaching toward one of the deepest questions humanity has ever carved into clay. The Anunnaki have captured modern imagination as the great gods of ancient Mesopotamia, those powerful beings who supposedly descended from heaven to shape civilization, to demand worship, to create and command. But the Sumerians themselves knew something that often gets lost in popular retellings. They knew their gods had parents. They recorded genealogies stretching backward into cosmic time, into realms where form had not yet separated from formlessness, where sweet water and salt water mingled in endless union. Before Anu ruled, who ruled? Before the divine council assembled, what existed in the silence? Scholars have debated these creation texts for over a century. Some read them as sophisticated, cosmological allegory, early humanity grasping at the physics of existence through mythological language. Others interpret them as literal divine genealogy, records of actual spiritual beings understood through the lens of ancient perception. Still others see natural philosophy encoded in narrative form, the Mesopotamian understanding of how order emerges from chaos, how differentiation arises from unity. Each interpretation carries weight. Each deserves consideration rather than dismissal. We are not here tonight to settle these debates or declare winners. The goal is something gentler than certainty. We're here to explore questions that have fascinated humans for 5,000 years, to walk through ancient temple libraries by starlight, to wander alongside Sumerian scribes who pressed reed stylus into wet clay and recorded what their priests taught about the time before time. Take a slow breath now. Let your shoulders drop just slightly. Feel whatever surface supports you. The pillow beneath your head, the mattress beneath your body. Notice how gravity holds you without effort. You don't have to do anything except listen and drift. If this exploration brings you comfort tonight, a like or subscribe helps others find their way to peaceful sleep through ancient history. I appreciate any support you offer. Now, imagine descending through layers of accumulated memory, through Greek philosophy that borrowed from Babylon, through Babylonian theology that transformed Sumerian tradition, through Sumerian priests who themselves claimed to preserve knowledge from before the flood, before the first cities, before writing existed to record what was known. We are sinking towards something very old tonight, something that existed when the universe was water and darkness and potential waiting to become. The primordial deep is patient. It has waited millennia for us to return and remember. Let us begin our descent, When on high the heaven had not been named, firm, ground below had not been called by name. These opening lines of the Enuma Elish, preserved on 7 clay tablets recovered from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, represent one of humanity's oldest attempts to describe what existed before existence itself. The tablets date to approximately 1100 BCE in their current form, though scholars recognize the narrative draws on Sumerian sources stretching back another 1,000 years. What strikes modern readers is not merely the antiquity, but the philosophical sophistication. The cosmos did not begin with a bang or a divine command. It began with the absence of names. Consider what this implies. Heaven existed before it was called heaven. Earth existed before anyone spoke the word earth. But in some profound sense, they did not fully exist until differentiation occurred, until boundaries formed, until consciousness arose to recognize and name what had always been present. The Babylonian priests who composed this text understood something that modern physics echoes. Reality and observation intertwine in mysterious ways. The unnamed is not nothing, but neither is it something in the way we understand somethingness. In that primordial state, 2 waters mingled without boundary. Tiamat, the salt sea, stretched vast and dark and teeming with potential. Apsu, the fresh water beneath all things, rose sweet and life-giving from depths no measurement could fathom. These were not metaphors to the ancient Mesopotamians. The Persian Gulf's brackish mixing zones, where the Tigris and Euphrates met ocean currents, provided daily visible evidence of cosmic principles made manifest. Salt and fresh, bitter and sweet, chaos and order. The universe began as union rather than separation. From this mingling, the first gods emerged like silt settling from turbulent water. Lahmu and Lahamu, whose names suggest sediment and deposit, represented the earliest differentiation. They were not created by conscious act. They precipitated naturally from cosmic union, the way crystals form in saturated solution. The Babylonians preserved and transformed older Sumerian concepts here, adapting Namu's role as primordial mother into the more elaborate genealogy involving Tiamat and Apsu as co-equal cosmic parents. What existed in the silence before the first divine word? The tablets suggest something almost Buddhist in its implications. A state without distinction, without subject or object, without the separation that language itself creates. When the young gods eventually began to move and make noise, disturbing the stillness of their primordial parents, they were not merely being inconsiderate. They were introducing differentiation into undifferentiated existence. Sound requires separation. Noise implies boundaries between the noisemaker and the disturbed. The cosmic conflict that would eventually tear Tiamat's body into heaven and earth began simply because consciousness cannot exist without creating distinction. The Babylonian scribes copied these tablets by lamplight, generation after generation, preserving a memory of the time before memory was possible. I've already written section 3, before heaven was named, earlier in our conversation. Here it is again for your reference. Section 3, before heaven was named. When on high the heaven had not been named, firm ground below had not been called by name. These opening lines of the Enuma Elish, preserved on 7 clay tablets recovered from the library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, represent one of humanity's oldest attempts to describe what existed before existence itself. The tablets date to approximately 1100 BCE in their current form, though scholars recognize the narrative draws on Sumerian sources stretching back another 1,000 years. What strikes modern readers is not merely the antiquity, but the philosophical sophistication. The cosmos did not begin with a bang or a divine command. It began with the absence of names. Consider what this implies. Heaven existed before it was called heaven. Earth existed before anyone spoke the word earth. But in some profound sense, they did not fully exist until differentiation occurred, until boundaries formed, until consciousness arose to recognize and name what had always been present. The Babylonian priests who composed this text understood something that modern physics echoes. Reality and observation intertwine in mysterious ways. The unnamed is not nothing, but neither is it something in the way we understand somethingness. In that primordial state, two waters mingled without boundary. Tiamat, the salt sea, stretched vast and dark and teeming with potential. Apsu, the fresh water beneath all things, rose sweet and life-giving from depths no measurement could fathom. These were not metaphors to the ancient Mesopotamians. The Persian Gulf's brackish mixing zones, where the Tigris and Euphrates met ocean currents, provided daily visible evidence of cosmic principles made manifest: salt and fresh, bitter and sweet, chaos and order. The universe began as union rather than separation. From this mingling, the first gods emerged like silt settling from turbulent water. Lahmu and Lahamu, whose names suggest sediment and deposit, represented the earliest differentiation. They were not created by conscious act. They precipitated naturally from cosmic union, the way crystals form in saturated solution. The Babylonians preserved and transformed older Sumerian concepts here, adapting Namu's role as primordial mother into the more elaborate genealogy involving Tiamat and Apsu as co-equal cosmic parents. What existed in the silence before the first divine word? The tablet suggests something almost Buddhist in its implications. A state without distinction, without subject or object, without the separation that language itself creates. When the young gods eventually began to move and make noise, disturbing the stillness of their primordial parents, they were not merely being inconsiderate. They were introducing differentiation into undifferentiated existence. Sound requires separation. Noise implies boundaries between the noisemaker and the disturbed. The cosmic conflict that would eventually tear Tiamat's body into heaven and earth began simply because consciousness cannot exist without creating distinction. The Babylonian scribes copied these tablets by lamplight, generation after generation, preserving a memory of the time before memory was possible. 200 kilometers south of modern Baghdad, where the Euphrates once spread into vast marshlands before meeting the Persian Gulf, sand dunes now cover what Sumerian king lists called the first city ever built, Eridu. The name itself carries weight across 5 millennia. Archaeological excavations led by Fuad Safar and Seton Lloyd between 1946 and 1949 revealed 18 successive temple levels, the oldest dating to approximately 5,400 BCE. Each temple had been built directly atop its predecessor, a continuous sacred site maintained for over 3,000 years before the first pyramid rose in Egypt. This was the home of Enki, god of fresh water and wisdom, and the priests who served him kept records of cosmic origins that stretched backward into time beyond human memory. The temple libraries of ancient Mesopotamia functioned as humanity's first archives. Clay tablets covered in wedge-shaped cuneiform script filled storage rooms organized by subject and date. Cosmological texts, astronomical observations, medical recipes, legal codes, economic records, knowledge accumulated across centuries, copied and recopied by scribes who understood their work as sacred duty. When Eridu's population declined around 2050 BCE as water sources shifted, the tablets remained buried beneath accumulating sand. Paradoxically, this abandonment preserved what continued use would have destroyed. Fired clay resists time in ways that papyrus and parchment cannot match. What we possess today represents perhaps 5% of what once existed. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad houses thousands of tablets recovered from Eridu, Nippur, Ur, and dozens of smaller sites. The British Museum holds the famous 7 tablets of the Enuma Elish, excavated from Nineveh between 1848 and 1876. The Louvre, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, Yale's Babylonian collection, fragments of Mesopotamian cosmology scatter across institutions worldwide, often still awaiting translation. Scholars estimate that over 500,000 cuneiform tablets have been recovered, but only a fraction have been fully studied. The creation accounts we rely upon represent glimpses through narrow windows into vast libraries mostly lost. Henry Rawlinson cracked the cuneiform code in the 1850s by comparing inscriptions carved into the cliff face at Behistun in western Iran. George Smith, a humble engraver at the British Museum, identified the first fragments of the flood narrative in 1872, recognizing parallels to Genesis that shocked Victorian England. These pioneers could not have imagined how deep the cosmological material would reach. Each decade brings new translations, new tablets emerging from museum storage, new fragments joining to reveal texts longer and stranger than previous generations suspected. The scribes of Eridu believed they were preserving knowledge that predated their own civilization. Temple records speak of antediluvian sages who brought wisdom from before the flood, before the gods reorganized heaven and earth. Whether this represents genuine transmission of older oral tradition or priestly imagination projecting authority backward, we cannot determine with certainty. What remains clear is the intention. These tablets were meant to carry memory across abysses of time. Tonight, we are their distant readers, 5,000 years downstream. From the mingling of Tiamat and Apsu, something began to differentiate. Not through conscious act or divine intention, but through the patient accumulation that occurs when opposing forces meet and interact over vast spans of time. Lahmu and Lahamu emerged first, the oldest children of the primordial waters. Their names derive from the Akkadian word Lahamu, meaning hairy or muddy, suggesting the silt and sediment that forms where river current slows and particles settle. These were not gods of thunder or wisdom or war. They were gods of deposit, of accumulation, of the slow precipitation that transforms turbulent water into something approaching solidity. Picture the process as the ancient Mesopotamians witnessed it daily. Where the Tigris meets still pools, where the Euphrates spreads across floodplains each spring, sediment clouds the water brown and then gradually descends. Given enough time, given patience measured in seasons rather than hours, mud becomes earth. Marshland becomes dry ground. The primordial chaos resolves itself through natural process into forms that can be walked, upon, built upon, named. Lahmu and Lahamu embodied this principle at cosmic scale. They were the universe's first attempt at form, still fluid, still indistinct, but no longer purely formless. The Sumerian understanding of divine emergence differs profoundly from later creation traditions. Yahweh speaks and light exists. The Greek logos orders chaos through rational principle. But in Mesopotamian cosmology, gods arise naturally from cosmic conditions. the way crystals form in cooling magma or life emerges from chemical soup given sufficient time. No external creator stands outside the system to initiate it. The system generates its own consciousness, its own divine awareness, through processes inherent to existence itself. Divinity precipitates from the universe like salt from evaporating seawater. Lahmu and Lahamu existed for eons in Mesopotamian reckoning, though the tablets provide no specific duration. Time before, the ordering of heaven operated by different rules than the Ea, measured cycles that would later define days and years. These first gods grew and strengthened, and eventually produced their own offspring, Anshar and Kishar, the horizon gods whose names mean whole sky and whole earth. Each generation represented further differentiation, further solidification of cosmic structure. The family tree extended outward and downward through divine time, grandfather and grandmother of gods who would themselves become grandparents to the Anunnaki. The tablets invite us to imagine patience beyond human comprehension. Generation after generation of divine beings emerging, maturing, reproducing, each cycle perhaps spanning millions of years by any measure we might recognize. The Anunnaki, who eventually concern themselves with human affairs, appear late in this genealogy, newcomers to a cosmos already ancient beyond reckoning. Anu, Enlil, Enki. These familiar names represent the youngest branches of a family tree rooted in primordial sediment and salt, water darkness. Take a breath here. Let the scale of this timeline wash over you without demanding comprehension. Some things are meant to be felt rather than fully grasped. Anshar and Kishar emerged from Lamu and Lahamu as the next step in cosmic differentiation. Their names carry precise meaning. Anshar translates as whole heaven or sky pivot, the complete circle of everything above. Kishar means whole earth or earth pivot, the complete circle of everything below. Where their parents represented the first separation of solid from liquid, Anshar and Kishar embodied the fundamental division between upper and lower realms. The horizon line where sky meets earth, that thin boundary visible from any Mesopotamian ziggurat at dawn, marked the place where these two divine principles touched and defined each other. The multiplication of gods through successive generations followed a consistent pattern in Mesopotamian theology. Each new divine pair represented greater specificity, further refinement of cosmic structure. Lahmu and Lahamu differentiated form from formlessness. Anshar and Kishar differentiated vertical space into above and below. The process resembled cell division more than craftsmanship, the universe subdividing itself into increasingly complex arrangements without external guidance. Babylonian astronomers who tracked planetary movements across centuries would have recognized this principle. Order emerges from chaos through patient iteration, through cycles repeating until patterns stabilize. Anshar grew to surpass his father in might and wisdom, as the Enuma Elish records. He in turn produced a son like himself, equal in power and bearing. Anu, whose name simply means sky, or heaven. With Anu's emergence, the divine genealogy finally arrived at a figure familiar to students of Mesopotamian religion. Anu would father Enlil, lord of wind and command. Enlil would father the great gods of the active pantheon. But Anu himself was not. Primordial, he was fourth generation at minimum, descended from forces far older and stranger than the Skyfather imagery suggests. Why did Sumerian and Babylonian theologians construct this elaborate prehistory? Several purposes intertwined. First, genealogy established legitimacy in Mesopotamian culture, just as it did for human kings. A god with ancient lineage commanded more reverence than one who appeared suddenly without ancestry. Second, the generational framework explained why certain cosmic structures preceded others. Heaven and earth existed before the gods who ruled them, because Anshar and Kishar preceded Anu and his children. Third, the theology provided answers to questions priests must have faced from curious worshippers. Where did the gods come from? What existed before them? The Sumerians gazed at the same stars we see tonight and wondered about origins with the same restless curiosity. They constructed genealogies that stretched backward into primordial darkness because human minds resist accepting existence without explanation. Even their gods required parents. Even divine power needed a source. The tablets recording these ancestral lines represented millennia of theological reflection, generation after generation of priests refining the story of how everything began. Anu sat upon his heavenly throne as king of the gods, yet he remembered his grandparents. The primordial waters still churned beneath the foundations of the world. Modern retellings often reduce Tiamat to a monster, a chaos dragon defeated by heroic Marduk in cosmic battle. Video games cast her as a final boss. Fantasy novels depict her as the embodiment of evil, requiring destruction. But the cuneiform tablets tell a more complex story, one where the dragon mother begins not as adversary, but as the original source of all divine life. Tiamat was the cosmic womb before she became the cosmic enemy, and understanding this transformation reveals something profound about how theologies evolve across centuries. The name Tiamat derives from the Akkadian word Timtu, meaning sea, not a lake or river, but the vast salt ocean stretching beyond horizon's reach, the Persian Gulf opening into waters no Mesopotamian vessel could fully explore. Fishermen who ventured too far from shore reported currents that pulled craft into unmarked depths, storms that rose without warning from apparently calm surfaces, creatures glimpsed briefly before disappearing into darkness. The sea gave life through its fish and trade routes, yet it also swallowed the unprepared without remorse. Tiamat embodied this duality completely. She nourished and she threatened. She birthed and she destroyed. In the earliest passages of the Enuma Elish, Tiamat appears as protective mother rather than raging monster. When the young gods disturb Apsu with their noise and movement, it is Apsu who first proposes destroying them. Tiamat objects, asking how they could destroy what they themselves had created. Her maternal instinct initially overrides her irritation. The tablets preserved in the British Museum, catalog numbers K.3473 and associated fragments, record her words pleading for patience with divine children who knew no better than to be restless. This is not the behavior of primordial evil. Her transformation into adversary occurs only after Ea kills Apsu, her consort and co-creator. Grief and rage combine as she produces 11 monsters to avenge her husband's death. The viper, the dragon, the sphinx, the great lion, the mad dog, the scorpion man, and others whose forms combined animal ferocity with supernatural power. She elevates Kingu, one of her children, to lead this monstrous army against the younger gods. The peaceful mother becomes wrathful avenger, but the texts make clear that provocation preceded her fury. Scholars like Thorkild Jacobson and Stephanie Dalley have traced how Babylonian editors reshaped older Sumerian material to serve political purposes. Marduk's defeat of Tiamat justified Babylon's supremacy over older Sumerian cities. The cosmic narrative legitimized earthly power arrangements. but fragments of the earlier tradition survive, preserving glimpses of Tiamat as life-giver rather than life-taker. The Sumerian goddess Namu, primordial sea mother who created heaven and earth, likely represents an older, less demonized version of the same cosmic principle. The salt sea still churns beneath the story we inherited. Tiamat's body became heaven and earth, according to the myth. Her ribs the vault of sky, her tail the Milky Way stretching overhead. Every time we look up at stars, we gaze through the transformed flesh of the Dragon Mother. Before temples rose on earthly plains, before priests burned incense in mud brick sanctuaries, the gods themselves gathered in assembly. The Sumerian term for this divine council was Purim, the same word used for human gatherings, where elders debated matters of communal concern. Tablets from Nippur, dating to approximately 2100 BCE, describe these celestial meetings in remarkable detail. Gods seated according to rank, speaking in turn, reaching decisions through deliberation rather than decree. The universe operated through consensus long before the Anunnaki imposed their hierarchical order. Anshar presided over these earliest councils as senior deity, his position earned through primacy of birth rather than conquest. Decisions required discussion. When cosmic functions needed assignment, when boundaries between divine territories required definition, the elder gods convened and debated. Who would govern the fresh waters beneath the earth? Who would command the winds that swept across open plains? Who would track the movements of celestial bodies and mark the seasons? These responsibilities distributed themselves through council deliberation, each god accepting duties suited to their nature and lineage. Scholars debate whether divine assembly reflected human, political, organization or the reverse. Thorkild Jacobson argued in his influential 1943 study that Mesopotamian democracy, such as it existed, projected itself onto heaven. Communities where councils of elders genuinely shared power imagined their gods operating similarly. Others suggest the relationship flowed in the opposite direction. Human kings legitimized their rule by claiming to mirror divine governance structures. Perhaps both processes intertwined, heaven and earth shaping each other across centuries of theological reflection. The younger gods, children, and grandchildren of the primordial pairs filled the cosmic spaces with activity. They moved through the realms their parents had differentiated. They experimented with their powers. They made noise. The Enuma Elish describes this disturbance in vivid terms. The young gods disturbed Tiamat's belly with their constant motion, creating turbulence within her vast oceanic form. Apsu could find no rest. The primordial silence that had characterized existence before differentiation gave way to the clamor of divine vitality. Generational conflict thus seeded itself into the cosmic order from early times. The ancient ones craved stillness. The young ones embodied motion. Apsu complained to Tiamat that their children's behavior had become intolerable, that he could neither rest by day nor sleep by night. His proposed solution was extinction. Destroy the young gods and restore primordial peace. Tiamat initially refused, but the tension remained unresolved. A universe divided between elder stillness and youthful activity could not maintain equilibrium indefinitely. The seeds of the great divine war germinated in these council chambers and cosmic arguments. Alliances formed, resentments accumulated. Ea's preemptive strike against Apsu would eventually force Tiamat's transformation from mother to avenger. But for a time, however brief in cosmic reckoning, The elder gods maintained order through deliberation rather than violence. That fragile peace could not hold forever. The young gods were too restless, too hungry for their own dominion. The noise became unbearable. Day after day, the younger gods moved through cosmic spaces with restless energy, their activities sending vibrations through the primordial waters that had known only stillness since before time began. Apsu, the freshwater abyss, could find no peace. Sleep eluded him. Rest became memory rather than present reality. He summoned his vizier Mumu and approached Tiamat with a proposal that would echo through all subsequent mythology. Their children must be destroyed. The clamor must cease. Primordial silence must be restored, whatever the cost. Tiamat, as we have heard, refused initially, but Apsu's resolve hardened with each passing cycle of disturbance. He would not simply endure, he would act. Word of his intention spread through divine channels, as such secrets always do, reaching the ears of those most threatened by the primordial father's plan. Among the younger gods, one possessed wisdom and magical power exceeding all others. Ea, known to the Sumerians as Enki, understood that defense required preemption. Waiting for Apsu to strike first meant risking annihilation. The Enuma Elish describes Ea's countermeasure with sparse but potent language. He fashioned a magical circle and cast a spell of sleep upon Apsu, a slumber so deep it merged with death. The tablets use the Akkadian phrase Ushnamitishu, meaning he caused him to sleep, but the subsequent narrative makes clear this was no temporary rest. Ea removed Apsu's crown and clothed himself in the primordial father's radiance. He slew his own grandfather, the cosmic parent of all divine lineages, to preserve his own existence and that of his generation. Consider the weight of this act. The gods killed their creator. Divine hands ended divine life at the very foundations of existence. No external enemy threatened the cosmic order. The threat arose from within the divine family itself. Later, theological traditions would struggle with the implications. If gods could die, what truly separated them from mortal beings? If children could destroy parents, what loyalty bound the universe together? The Mesopotamian answer seems to have been pragmatic rather than moralistic. Survival justified the unjustifiable. Ea acted because the alternative was extinction. Upon Apsu's corpse, Ea constructed his dwelling. The texts describe this with architectural precision. Chambers built within the body of the slain god, a temple established upon primordial remains. The freshwater springs that bubbled up throughout Mesopotamia, the sweet aquifers that made agriculture possible in an arid land, represented Apsu's ongoing presence despite death. His body became the foundation of civilization itself. Every well dug into Iraqi soil, every irrigation channel drawing from underground sources, tapped the corpse of the grandfather god. Eridu's temple stood where these waters surfaced most abundantly. Pilgrims who drank from sacred pools consumed the essence of divine death, transformed into life-giving sustenance. The boundary between slaying and sanctification blurred entirely. Apsu sleeps still beneath the world he once filled with presence. His silence purchased the existence of everything that followed. In the chamber Ea constructed upon Apsu's slain body, a child was born who would reshape the cosmos. Marduk entered existence within the very dwelling built from divine patricide, his first breaths drawn in rooms constructed upon his great-grandfather's corpse. The Enuma Elish describes his appearance with breathless accumulation. 4 eyes to see in every direction, 4 ears to hear all things, fire blazing from his mouth when he spoke. He surpassed his father Ea in wisdom and power from his earliest moments. The other gods gazed upon this newcomer and recognized something unprecedented. Here was a deity shaped for conflict on a scale none had yet imagined. Tiamat had not forgotten Apsu's death. Grief festered across cosmic ages, transforming maternal sorrow into vengeful purpose. She began producing monsters suited for war against the younger gods who had murdered her consort. The tablet catalog number K.3437 in the British Museum preserves descriptions of these creatures. The viper with sharpened fang, the dragon cloaked in terror, the sphinx and great lion and scorpion man, 11 beings whose forms combined animal ferocity with supernatural horror. She elevated Kingu, one of her divine children, to command this army, fixing upon his chest the tablet of destinies that conferred supreme authority over cosmic fate. The elder gods trembled before Tiamat's advancing host. Ea attempted the same magical sleep that had defeated Apsu, but the spell failed against the Dragon Mother's grief-hardened will. Anu himself approached to negotiate peace, but retreated before her fury. The divine assembly fell into despair until Anshar remembered his great-grandson born in Apsu's transformed dwelling. Marduk was summoned before the Council of Gods, and there he made his offer. He would face Tiamat alone. He would defeat the chaos she embodied, but his price was absolute sovereignty over all divine beings. The assembled gods agreed. They had no alternative. Tablets K.4832 and K.5419c record the ceremony where Marduk received his divine weapons: the bow and mace, the lightning bolt, the net woven from the 4 winds. He mounted his storm chariot drawn by 4 terrible horses named Slayer, Pitiless, Racer, and Flyer. Their teeth dripped poison. Their training prepared them for chaos itself. Marduk rode toward the Primordial Mother with weapons that crackled with cosmic power. The battle itself unfolds across some of the most dramatic passages in ancient literature. Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow Marduk whole, but he drove the evil wind into her belly, distending her body until she could not close her jaws. His arrow split her heart. Her corpse stretched across uncreated space, and from her divided flesh, Marduk fashioned the universe we inhabit. Her upper half became the vault of heaven, secured with bars to hold back the celestial waters. Her lower half became the earth beneath our feet. Her eyes released the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The Dragon Mother's body became the world itself. Every landscape we walk crosses her transformed remains. Only now, after primordial waters mingled and separated, after generations of elder gods rose and fell, after Tiamat's body was split to form heaven and earth, only now do the Anunnaki assume their familiar positions in Mesopotamian religion. They were inheritors rather than originators, recipients of cosmic power rather than its ultimate source. The tablets make this genealogical debt explicit. Anu descended from Anshar. Enlil descended from Anu. Enki, who would shape humanity from clay, stood upon the corpse of Apsu in Fimeltfrir, the temple his father Ea had constructed. Every major deity of the active Sumerian and Babylonian pantheon traced lineage backward through divine generations to the primordial waters themselves. Following Marduk's victory over Tiamat, the cosmos required reorganization. The Enuma Elish describes an elaborate ceremony where the triumphant god assigned stations and duties to the assembled divine host. The Anunnaki received their specific domains and responsibilities through this distribution, not through inherent right or self-generated authority. Marduk commanded, and they obeyed. The tablets recovered from Ashurbanipal's library, catalog numbers K.3567 and K.8526, record the grateful response of gods who found their purposes defined by another's decree. They had not built this cosmos. They merely occupied positions within a structure established through violence and transformation. Sumerian theological texts speak of 300 Anunnaki in heaven and 300 Anunnaki in the underworld. The precision of this number suggests organizational structure rather than casual estimation. These 600 divine beings maintained cosmic operations across upper and lower realms, each responsible for specific functions within the larger whole. Weather patterns, agricultural cycles, human reproduction, disease and healing, justice and kingship. Every aspect of existence fell under some deity's supervision. The system resembled a vast bureaucracy, with the Anunnaki serving as administrators of cosmic order rather than its architects. They built upon foundations laid by older powers. The freshwater spring sacred to Enki flowed from Apsu's eternal body. The vault of heaven stretched across Tiamat's transformed ribs. The very ground beneath Mesopotamian cities consisted of the dragon mother's lower half, compressed and hardened into soil that could support ziggurats and irrigation channels. When Enlil sent winds across the plain, those winds moved through spaces, created by Marduk's original violence. When Shamash rose each morning, his chariot traversed a sky formed from primordial dragon flesh. The Anunnaki understood these debts, at least in the theological imagination of their priests. Temple hymns recovered from Nippur, and acknowledged primordial ancestry alongside celebrations of present power. The gods who demanded human worship themselves owed existence to forces they had not created and could not fully comprehend. Divine hierarchy extended downward toward humanity, but also upward and backward toward mysteries even gods could not penetrate. Tonight we see the familiar Mesopotamian pantheon in clearer context. They were not the beginning. They were a chapter in a story already ancient when they assumed their thrones. The Enuma Elish dominates modern understanding of Mesopotamian creation, but it represents only one tradition among several that circulated across ancient Iraq. The Eridu Genesis, preserved on a single, fragmentary tablet now housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, tells a distinctly different story. Here, the god Enki takes center stage rather than Marduk. Here, creation proceeds through different mechanisms and sequences. The tablet, catalog number C.BS 10673, dates to approximately 1600 BCE, though scholars recognize it records traditions considerably older. Multiple cosmologies coexisted in Mesopotamian thought, sometimes contradicting each other in fundamental ways. Each major city maintained its own theological traditions centered on its patron deity. Nippur's priests elevated Enlil as supreme cosmic authority. Eridu's theologians championed Enki as the wise organizer of earthly affairs. Celebrated Nana, the moon god, as preeminent among celestial powers. When Babylon rose to political dominance under Hammurabi around 1792 BCE, its priests composed the Enuma Elish, specifically to justify Marduk's supremacy over older, more established divine figures. Cosmology served politics. Creation myths legitimized power arrangements. Different cities, different genealogies, different accounts of how everything began. These variations reveal something important about Mesopotamian religious thought. No single orthodoxy controlled theological speculation across the entire region. Scribes preserved traditions they inherited, even when those traditions conflicted with texts favored by current rulers. The library at Nippur contained tablets presenting Enlil as supreme, alongside tablets acknowledging Marduk's later rise. Scholarly honesty, or perhaps simple conservatism, prevented the wholesale destruction of superseded cosmologies. What earlier generations had written deserved preservation regardless of contemporary theological fashion. Fragments hint at cosmological traditions even older than those we can reconstruct. A Sumerian tablet from Nippur, dated to approximately 2150 BCE, and now split between collections in Philadelphia and Istanbul, references creation accounts that the scribe himself describes as ancient. Phrases like, "In those days, in those far-off days," introduce narratives already considered primordial by people who lived 4,000 years ago. Whatever those earliest creation stories contained, they survived only partially, filtered through centuries of copying and adaptation. We possess echoes of echoes, reflections of reflections. The scribes who preserved these multiple accounts worked in temple schools called edubas, literally tablet houses. Young students learned cuneiform by copying older texts, including cosmological narratives that would have seemed contradictory to anyone demanding systematic consistency. But consistency was apparently not the goal. Preservation was. A student in Nippur around 1900 BCE might copy the Enuma Elish one day and a competing Enlil-centered creation account the next, learning both traditions as part of cultural inheritance rather than exclusive truth claims. Tonight we inherit this multiplicity. No single story captures what the Mesopotamians believed about cosmic origins because they themselves believed many stories simultaneously. The primordial waters flowed through different channels depending on who told the tale. Perhaps that diversity deserves respect rather than resolution. Different truths for different temples, different nights, different needs. Mesopotamian priests spent thousands of hours atop ziggurats watching the night sky, recording planetary movements, tracking lunar cycles, noting stellar risings and settings with meticulous precision. The astronomical tablets recovered from Nineveh and Babylon reveal mathematical sophistication that would not be matched in Europe until the Renaissance. These same priests composed and copied the cosmological texts describing Tiamat, Apsu, and the divine genealogies. The question arises naturally: did astronomical observation shape mythological narrative? Were the primordial gods personifications of cosmic phenomena witnessed nightly from temple platforms? Some scholars argue that Tiamat represented the Milky Way itself, that band of diffuse light stretching across the night sky, which ancient observers recognized as somehow fundamental to celestial structure. Her elongated serpentine form matches the galaxy's appearance. Her body, split to form heaven and earth, might encode the astronomical observation that the Milky Way divides the visible sky into hemispheres. The 11 monsters she created before the final battle have been tentatively identified with zodiacal constellations, though this interpretation remains contested. Apsu, the freshwater abyss, may have represented the dark spaces between stars, the cosmic ocean through which celestial bodies appeared to swim. The Mesopotamians understood precession, that slow wobble in Earth's axis that shifts the position of stars over centuries. A complete precessional cycle takes approximately 25,920 years, and evidence suggests Babylonian astronomers tracked this movement across generations of observation. Divine genealogies spanning multiple cosmic ages might encode awareness of precessional time, with each generation of gods representing a different celestial configuration. Lahmu and Lahamu, Anshar and Kishar, Anu and his children. Perhaps these names marked not just theological abstractions, but actual phases in the slow rotation of the heavens. The ziggurat at Babylon, called Etemenanki, or House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth, rose 7 stages high, each level associated with a different celestial body. Priests climbed 270 steps to reach observation platforms where they tracked Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Mercury against the fixed star background. Similar structures at Ur, Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu served as combined temples and observatories. The same buildings where creation myths were recited also functioned as scientific instruments for measuring cosmic time. Mathematical tablets from the Seleucid period around 300 BCE demonstrate that Babylonian astronomers could predict lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. They tracked planetary positions using coordinate systems and calculated cycles extending centuries into past and future. This sophisticated astronomical tradition stretched backward through Babylonian and Assyrian periods to Sumerian foundations. The priests who first recorded the Anunnaki genealogies likely possessed astronomical knowledge we cannot fully reconstruct from surviving fragments. Perhaps the creation myths served dual purposes: theological narratives for general worshippers and encoded astronomical data for initiated priests. The dragon Tiamat might be both primordial mother and celestial phenomenon. Marduk's victory might commemorate both divine triumph and observed cosmic event. The stars still trace their ancient patterns overhead. They keep the same time the Sumerian priests measured. A peculiar thread runs through Mesopotamian theology that distinguishes it from later religious traditions. The gods were not self-sufficient. They required food, drink, housing, and service. Temple offerings were not symbolic gestures of devotion, but actual sustenance consumed by divine beings who experienced genuine hunger. The Sumerian term for sacrifice, siskur, implied feeding rather than merely honoring. Priests who laid bread and beer before cult statues understood themselves as waiters serving meals to powerful guests who would grow irritable if neglected. This divine dependency raises questions that the ancients themselves seem to have pondered. Before humanity existed, the gods performed their own labor. The Atra-Hasis Epic, preserved on tablets dating to approximately 1700 BCE, describes this arrangement in detail. The Anunnaki divided themselves into 2 groups: the great gods who ruled and the Igigi who worked. The Igigi dug canals, maintained irrigation systems, grew crops, and prepared food for their superiors. This cosmic labor force operated for thousands of years until exhaustion bred rebellion. The Igigi burned their tools and surrounded Enlil's dwelling, refusing to continue. Divine society faced a labor crisis that threatened its foundations. The solution, proposed by the wise Enki, was humanity. Beings fashioned from clay mixed with divine blood would assume the burden of labor, freeing even the lowest gods from toil. Humans would dig the canals, tend the fields, bake the bread, brew the beer, and present offerings in temples. The Atra-Hasis text is explicit about purpose. Humanity was created to serve, to work, to feed the gods who could not or would not feed themselves. We were made as divine servants, cosmic waitstaff for beings who experienced hunger despite their immortality. This theology inverts assumptions common in later traditions. The gods did not create from abundance or love or desire to share existence. They created from need, from the pressure of divine labor shortages, from practical necessity. The universe required maintenance, and the gods preferred not to provide it themselves. Temples functioned not as places where humans sought divine favor, but as facilities where humans fulfilled contractual obligations to their creators. The relationship was transactional at its foundation, though genuine affection and devotion certainly developed within that framework. Philosophers might puzzle over the contradiction. How could beings powerful enough to create humanity lack the self-sufficiency to feed themselves? Why would cosmic forces capable of shaping heaven and earth from dragon corpses require bread and beer from mortal hands? The Mesopotamians seem not to have found this paradoxical. Perhaps they understood something we have forgotten, that all existence involves mutual dependency, that even the highest powers participate in systems of exchange and reciprocity. Nothing stands entirely alone, not even gods. The temples crumbled millennia ago. No priest has laid offerings before Anu or Enlil in over 2,000 years. If divine hunger was real, the gods have been starving for a very long time. Or perhaps they found sustenance elsewhere, in ways the tablets never recorded. Mainstream scholarship approaches Mesopotamian cosmology as sophisticated mythological philosophy, the product of highly intelligent minds working within their cultural frameworks to explain existence. Scholars like Jean Bottero, Thorkild Jacobson, and Stephanie Daly have spent careers demonstrating how these texts reveal complex theological thinking comparable to Greek philosophy or Indian metaphysics. The Enuma Elish represents not primitive superstition, but careful reflection on cosmic origins, divine nature, and humanity's place within structured existence. Academic consensus treats these narratives as meaningful intellectual achievements deserving serious engagement rather than dismissal. Symbolic readings offer another layer of interpretation. Some scholars argue that creation myths encoded agricultural knowledge essential for Mesopotamian survival. Tiamat's salt waters and Apsu's fresh waters represented the actual hydrological systems that made irrigation possible. The cosmic battle might allegorize seasonal flooding, the annual struggle to control rivers that could nourish or destroy crops depending on human management. Political allegory also emerges clearly in texts like the Enuma Elish, where Marduk's supremacy justified Babylon's dominance over older Sumerian cities. The cosmic narrative legitimized earthly power arrangements, making theology serve imperial purposes. Ancient astronaut theorists propose more radical readings. Writers like Zecharia Sitchin, whose 1976 book, The 12th Planet, sparked popular interest, argued that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial beings who genetically engineered humanity as a labor force. Sitchin claimed to read Sumerian texts differently than academic scholars, finding references to spacecraft, genetic manipulation, and planetary origins in passages others interpreted symbolically. Mainstream Assyriologists reject these readings categorically, noting that Sitchin's translations contradict established linguistic knowledge accumulated over 150 years of cuneiform scholarship. His interpretations require ignoring standard meanings of well-understood terms. Yet his book sold millions of copies, suggesting these ideas satisfy needs that conventional scholarship does not address. Psychological interpretations treat divine genealogies as maps of consciousness rather than literal cosmology. Carl Jung's followers see Tiamat and Apsu as representing the unconscious mind, the formless depths from which differentiated awareness emerges. The divine generations parallel stages of psychological development, from undifferentiated oceanic feeling through progressive separation and individuation. Marduk's victory over Tiamat becomes the ego's necessary struggle against dissolution into unconscious chaos. These readings neither confirm nor deny historical claims, instead treating mythology as universal human expression transcending specific cultural origins. Which interpretation captures truth? Perhaps the question itself misleads. Different frameworks illuminate different aspects of these ancient texts. Scholarly analysis reveals historical context and linguistic precision. Symbolic readings connect mythology to practical concerns of agriculture and politics. Psychological approaches find universal patterns resonating across cultures and centuries. Even fringe theories, whatever their factual limitations, demonstrate the enduring power these narratives hold over human imagination. Holding multiple interpretations with humble uncertainty may honor these texts better than demanding singular conclusions. The tablets themselves offer no definitive reading guide. They simply preserve questions that each generation must answer for itself. If Tiamat and Apsu created the first gods who created Tiamat and Apsu, if primordial waters existed before everything else, where did those waters come from? The infinite regress problem haunts every cosmology that posits origins, demanding explanation behind explanation in an endless chain, reaching backward towards something that must simply exist without cause. Modern philosophers call this the first cause dilemma. The Sumerians, it seems, recognized the puzzle thousands of years before Aristotle formalized the argument. Their answer centered on Namu. In the oldest Sumerian theological texts, predating the Babylonian elevation of Tiamat and Apsu, Namu appears as the primordial sea who gave birth to heaven and earth without consort, without parent, without prior cause. A hymn from dating to approximately 2100 BCE, addresses her as the mother who gave birth to all the gods. She simply was. No tablet records her origin because, within Sumerian theological imagination, she had no origin. Namu represented the necessary foundation upon which all subsequent existence rested, the uncreated creator required to halt infinite regress. The concept of eternal existence without beginning challenged human intuition then as it does now. Everything we experience has causes, predecessors, explanations rooted in earlier states. Rivers flow from mountains. Children emerge from parents. Buildings rise from materials quarried elsewhere. The mind naturally seeks origins, pushes backward through chains of causation, demands to know what came before. Yet logic suggests that either something exists eternally without cause, or an infinite chain of causes extends backward forever with no foundation. Neither option satisfies completely. Different cultures have answered this question through various strategies. Greek philosophers propose the unmoved mover, a necessary being whose existence required no external cause. Indian traditions conceived cyclical time without absolute beginning, each universe emerging from the dissolution of its predecessor in endless repetition. Hebrew theology declared, "In the beginning God created," placing divine existence before and outside the created order without explaining divine origins. The Mesopotamians offered Namu, the primordial sea who was not made but simply was, from whom all making flowed. Perhaps the question itself exhausts more than it illuminates. The demand for ultimate origins may reflect human cognitive limitations rather than cosmic structure. We require causes because we exist within causal sequences, but existence itself might operate by different principles than those our evolved minds naturally grasp. The Sumerians who pressed reed into clay and recorded Namu's primacy may have understood something we easily forget. Some mysteries resist resolution, not because we lack information, but because resolution is not what they offer. Tonight, resting in darkness, the question behind the question can simply be held, without forcing answers. Who created the creators? The primordial waters keep their silence on this matter, and perhaps that silence itself provides a kind of peace. Not knowing can feel like failure, or it can feel like acceptance. The difference lies not in the mystery, but in how we meet it. The primordial patterns recorded on Mesopotamian clay tablets did not remain confined to the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. They flowed outward through trade routes and conquests, through deportations and diplomatic exchanges, seeding themselves into traditions that would eventually forget their Sumerian origins. When we examine Greek, Hebrew, Gnostic, and Neoplatonic cosmologies, echoes of Tiamat and Apsu resonate beneath surfaces that claim independent revelation. Greek mythology presents striking parallels. Before Zeus and the Olympians ruled from their mountain sanctuary, the Titans held cosmic power. Before the Titans, Gaia and Uranos embodied earth and sky. Before even these primal forces, chaos existed, a formless void remarkably similar to the undifferentiated state before Mesopotamian creation. Hesiod's Theogony, composed around 700 BCE, describes a succession of divine generations where younger gods overthrow older powers. Kronos castrates his father Uranos. Zeus defeats Kronos and imprisons the Titans. The pattern mirrors Marduk's victory over Tiamat with precision that suggests transmission rather than coincidence. The Hebrew Bible preserves perhaps the most direct linguistic connection. Genesis 1:2 describes creation beginning when darkness was upon the face of the deep. The Hebrew word for deep is tehom, a term linguists trace directly to Tiamat through well-documented phonetic evolution. The primordial waters over which God's Spirit moved carried the dragon mother's name into scripture that would shape Western civilization. No serpent-slaying battle appears in Genesis, but related passages in Psalms and Isaiah reference Yahweh defeating sea monsters, called Rahab and Leviathan. The combat myth survived in fragments even as Hebrew theology transformed its meaning. Gnostic traditions of the early centuries CE elaborated complex cosmologies involving emanation from ultimate divine sources through successive levels of spiritual beings. The pleroma, or fullness of divine reality, generated paired divine principles called aeons in processes remarkably similar to Mesopotamian divine genealogies. Sophia, the fallen wisdom figure, played a role structurally parallel to Tiamat, a feminine cosmic principle whose actions led to material creation. Neoplatonic philosophers like Plotinus, writing in the 3rd century CE, proposed similar emanation schemes where the one generated mind-generated soul in descending sequences of divine manifestation. Why does humanity keep retelling this story? Across cultures separated by centuries and continents, creation narratives return to common patterns. Formless origins differentiate into structured cosmos. Elder powers give way to younger rulers. Divine genealogies extend backward toward ultimate mysteries that resist final explanation. Perhaps these patterns reflect universal human psychology, the way developing minds experience emergence from undifferentiated infant consciousness into structured adult awareness. Perhaps they encode observations about natural processes, sediment settling from turbulent water, order emerging from chaos through patient time. The Sumerian scribes who first pressed these stories into clay could not have imagined how far their words would travel. Tonight, 5,000 years downstream, we still wonder about the same primordial waters. The questions outlast every answer offered for them. And perhaps that persistence itself reveals something true about both cosmos and consciousness. The same stars that Sumerian priests watched from ziggurat platforms 5,000 years ago still turn above you tonight. Orion traces his ancient path. The Pleiades, cluster where Mesopotamian astronomers marked the new year, continues its slow procession through unchanging darkness. Light that left distant suns when Eridu's temples still stood finally reaches Earth this evening, completing journeys begun before the tablets crumbled, before the languages fell silent, before the priests who wrote of Tiamat and Apsu returned to the dust from which humanity was fashioned. The cosmos keeps its own time, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations that briefly gazed upward and wondered. Your breath continues its rhythm without conscious direction. Air enters, pauses, releases. The pattern repeats as it has since your first moments outside the womb, as it repeated for your parents and their parents backward through generations beyond counting. Before your ancestors spoke language, before they walked upright, before the evolutionary branches that would lead to humanity diverged from other paths, breathing rhythms similar to yours sustained life in forms we would barely recognize. This involuntary cycle connects you to primordial processes older than thought, older than memory, older than the separation of salt water from fresh. The deep waters the Sumerians described exist within you as well as around you. The human body maintains salt concentrations remarkably similar to ancient ocean chemistry, carrying the sea within our cells wherever we travel across dry land. Amniotic fluid cradled you before birth in conditions echoing the primordial environment where life first stirred. You emerged from undifferentiated potential into structured existence, just as the cosmos emerged from Namu's formless depths. The pattern repeats at every scale, the universal encoded in the personal. Perhaps you do not need to know the final answer tonight. The question of who created the creators can rest beside you like an old companion whose presence no longer demands conversation. Mysteries held gently lose their sharp edges. The infinite regress that troubled philosophers and theologians for millennia becomes simply another feature of existence, no more disturbing than the darkness between stars. Not knowing can feel like falling, but falling through these particular waters leads only towards sleep. Let the ancient currents carry you now. The priests who watch the heavens have long since merged with the earth they charted. The tablets they inscribed have mostly returned to the clay from which they were formed. Yet something persists. The questions persist. The wonder persists. The stars that witness Tiamat's defeat continue their silent rotations overhead, keeping secrets they will never reveal. You are held by the same forces that held the first gods before they knew themselves as separate from the primordial waters. Breath slows. Thought softens. The boundary between waking and sleeping grows thin as the boundary between salt sea and fresh spring, where the first sediment began to settle. Rest now in the stillness before. Names. The deep waters receive all who return to them. Sleep well.